everyone here tonight. He's going to tell us all about their life's history and trials and tribulations of their total life. So first of all, we're going to Kate and Kim Krenz. I presume most of you people know them. So, and can everybody hear us tonight? I had complaint that nobody could hear us last time. So as long as you can hear what's going on. So we're going to start with Kate over here. And she's going to tell us where she was born and so on and so forth. And how bad a girl she was. So, okay?
Okay. I was the only child of.
Okay.
Oh,
Yeah.
pardon.
All right.
I was the only child of 6 girls and 2 boys that got born in the hospital, and that was in Hampton. We lived in Burlington, and except for my sister Liv and Kate were the only 2 left. And I tell you tonight, if another person asked me, how are you? I was going to say, hunky-dory. How long is it since you heard that? Well, how far about my life do you want me to go?
As far as you go. Where did you go to school?
Oh, I went to school in Burlington Central School, and then our high school. And I wasn't their best pupil by any means, but I got through.
Good, good.
And do you want me to go on more?
Right,
Well,
you tell us as much as you could got your
my
memory.
mother was hell-bent on getting as many of us as she could to university, so I went to Victoria College, University of Toronto. And one night when I was dancing there, a tall, handsome man came up and asked me to dance. And within a year, I was married to him. It wasn't cute. And the next time I was in the news was he and 2 chaps with him went out to their sailboat to take our sailboat down to Burlington. None of them got back. The only one they found after a week was Mike. And then I went back to university. My mother was simply marvelous. I have to tell you, newspaper people are terrible if they get such a thing as 3 men going off and not coming back. Well, the first thing they had in the paper was that Mrs. Phillips regretted that her 3 boys had gone off in a rowboat to young Central, women, not Central Island, the other one. And then the trouble began because the newspaper people were terrible. They wanted. And my mother put on a very horrible-looking uniform, and she just went to the door and she told them where they could go to. But I mean, I don't blame them because they've got to get news, but it was gruesome. Anyway, back to university I went. Mother is making sure I did. And Kim and I met in the Pure Food Building of the Canadian National Exhibition because we were both working there to get money for our university expenses. And I stepped out of Campbell's soup booth, and he stepped out of Black Diamond cheddar cheese. And I started to sing, and he started to whistle exactly the same tune at the same time. So we smiled at each other, and that was the beginning. And you can tell them why you asked me to a dance.
Well, I'd like to begin, first of all, to say how honored Kate and I are to be considered worthy of an interview by the Lakefield Historical Society. As I said to Len, that we feel we really arrived in Lakefield. We've been here since '67, so I think it's a fairly long time, but it's still an honor to be considered part of Lakefield.
Thank you.
Now, what was I going to say?
Before you were born.
Oh, I was nearly born in Peking, China. It's a fairly long story. My mother, who was a very competent and able person, did extremely well in Washington during the First World War. And at the end of the war, some of the women who had worked in the offices there were offered positions abroad because there were a number of new connections opening up. And she applied for a position in Rome, but that went to a general's daughter. So the man said, well, what else would you like, Julia? She said, well, I'll tell you. She said, I've been saving my lunch money for 2 years to buy a fur coat. And now I have that fur coat, I want to go somewhere where I can wear it. And he said, well, you go to Peking. He said, when that wind comes down from the Gobi Desert, you'll wrap that coat around you. Be glad you have it. So she went to Peking, and she met there my father, who was an ex-Marine. He'd been a Marine in the Philippines during World War I, and he was demobilized, and he was working in the American Consulate General there. And he was considerably younger than she was, but nevertheless, love prevailed, and they were married, and I was the first result. And I was nearly born in Peking, but my mother decided to go back to Kansas City to her home because she wasn't quite confident of the hospitals in Peking. Anyway, that is how I came into the world. I grew up in Peking. We were very much in the diplomatic circle there. It was a fascinating place to live. I went to a school called the Peking American School that had an American principal, Alice F. Moore, and I've written a memoir about her for Stanford University in California. But so I graduated from high school there and came to the States on a scholarship to Rochester University across the lake here. And it was a pretty lonely place for me because I was far away from home, 10,000 miles from home. There were no connections around there at all. But my aunt had very good friends in Brantford, Ontario. And they took me in and gave me a job during the summer, and they introduced me to Kate. They gave me a job at the
Pure food builder.
Pure Food Building, a Canadian exhibition, that's right. I was selling black diamond cheddar cheese, and Kate was getting out samples of Campbell's soup. And as a matter of fact, I was going to invite another girl to this dance. There was a dance at the end of the exhibition for all the workers there. And I invited a girl named Kay O'Reilly, red-haired, she was lovely, who was in the Smiles and Chuckles booth next door. And the eve of the dance, she finally told me she couldn't go. So here I was without a date, and Kate and I had been talking. So I said, well, how about coming up to this dance with me? And that was the start of it. Is that okay?
Yes. The only thing is, you better tell them the first thing you heard coming from the States.
Oh, yes. And
At not even 17, he was off all on his own he had to stay in Japan to catch a boat to come to the States. And he was very keen to hear something from the United States. This is what he heard.
Well, you can imagine American being brought up abroad in China, and all the good stuff came from the States, and it was sort of a dream place, that you imagine where you were going. I was looking forward to going to university. I was going to play American football in university. It was about 150 pounds, and it was 5'8", so I didn't have much of a chance. But that was part of my dream. Anyway, I came on a Japanese boat. I was going to Rochester, so I took a boat that went down through the Panama Canal, came up the east coast of the States, and docked in New York. As we came close to San Diego from Japan, we got closer and closer to the States, and we were listening for the first radio broadcast from the States. And finally, 3 days out from San Francisco, we heard it. And here it is. Oh, the Martins and the Coys were ferocious mountain boys, and Grandpa Martin, he was the first to go. When they found him on the mountain, he was bleeding like a fountain, 'cause the Coys had ventilated Grandpa's soul.
Well, we have to carry on now.
Oh, definitely. As long as you wish.
We were married, and we maybe were the only couple that went off to be married in a minister's house. We went by streetcar. Now, some people get.
Oh, remember, the minister was cross-eyed.
Yes. You could tell that.
He was cross-eyed. and he was a member of the family quite high up in the United Church. It was the United Church minister that married us. And I couldn't tell whether he was looking at me or not. I was nervous as a cat, you see it? And I was answering, I do. And he said, young man, when I want you to speak, I'll ask you to.
We lived where the colonnade is now. And he was lecturing, he had gotten a job, a partial job, lecturing to those girls. He lectured to the
Household economics.
Household economics. And one day, a member of the Royal RCMI came into our apartment, and he said, "You two had better get ready to move to Montreal." We didn't know what for, and he was very nervous. So we got ready. Oh, and incidentally, for the good of the women, I thought, I've tried hard to count, and I think we have moved 18 times. So you can imagine, we were quite used to moving. But it was quite heaven for us to go to Kim's. Incidentally, his mother was wonderful. She was as wonderful as my mother was. And I had her far longer than I had my own mother. And we moved in with her. We didn't have to pay for food or anything. We'd been being very careful on our meager diet, meager household account. And there were 3 or 4 big food stores in Montreal. And I could just go from store to store without paying a thing. Mother met everything. But then Kim went up to Deep River, and I was left behind with Mother. And then finally, I moved up too. And I tell you, that was a stark experience, because they were wartime houses. This was the kind of house we got, with no basements. And, well, even my preserves froze, but the payoff was when the iceman would come with a big block of ice covered with sawdust. He'd put it in our kitchen sink. It was up to us to wash the thing. This was having left a Frigidaire, you know, behind. And wash off the sawdust and go back and look at the ice box, the wooden ice box, and see if the piece of ice would fit. And if it didn't, work away. And all this because one of the workmen wasn't very smart and managed to leave his ice pick in his pocket, and it pierced his heart. So we paid for his stupidity. Now, you want to go on with something? Are we covering enough
You,
for it?
whatever you, just, any more, you know, you tell us.
Well, what Kate was talking about was a project, was a secret project in Montreal that we joined. It was very, very hush-hush, of course. And Dr. Hill, who came and got us to move from Toronto, couldn't tell us very much about it. But he did say that the scientists had learned to split the atom. And I didn't realize at that time what the significance of that was. But what the project really was a joint British, Canadian, and French project in Montreal to develop a reactor for the production of plutonium, which is as you know, an explosive nuclear fuel. And the reactor didn't get built during the war, didn't come into operation until about 1947. But we moved up to the village on the Ottawa River, there were two sites, one built for the plant and one built for the workers. And we moved into the village for the workers. And as I was telling the gentleman here, the wartime housing that came to us came from Nobel. There was a Defense Industries Limited plant, with explosives plant in Nobel, was closing up in 1945. And they brought the houses, they cut the houses down, brought them down for us in Deep River, which is on the Ottawa River. And as Kate says, these wartime houses were built on cedar posts embedded in the sand, and there was no floor insulation to speak of. The floor temperature in winter was about 10 degrees below freezing. And some people said that they could put a pan of water under the kitchen stove, which was a wood or coal stove, and have it going full blast, and the pan of water would still freeze under the stove. So we found that the solution to living indoors was to wear flight boots. We got these war surplus flight boots, heavy pants, and a sleeveless shirt, because there was so much temperature stratification that up here we could hardly stand the heat, and down below it was freezing. It was very hard on the kids who had to crawl along on the floor, you know. But that was part of the early experience. We survived.
I don't know what you want to hear next, but I've had a wonderful time thinking over all the places we've been. We had 4 years in Scotland, 2 years in Italy, and visits to many of the countries. And I will tell you that the most friendly country, as far as I was concerned, was Yugoslavia. They were wonderful dudes. And the thing you might like to know is that in the country, they built their houses right close to the road. And in the fall in Yugoslavia is the time to get married, because you're then ready for the crops coming and so forth. And so they have these wonderful parties where everybody comes, and they spread out onto the highway. And if you happen to come along in a car, then they have to move the tables, because the road was just amazing. But the country that I found the most friendly was Yugoslavia of them all. The one that I found the least friendly, because they liked their own privacy, was Sweden. They were very, I mean, if they saw you were walking out, they would look away rather than that. For some reason, they just wanted their own privacy. And I wonder what else. Thinking over all this has been grand, because I've remembered all kinds of good, pleasant things, and it has been a great, and did I tell you I was just determined if anybody said to me, how are you? I would say, hunky-dory. And we take an athletic class, a marvelous class too. our good friends, there are more that go to this class. And today, because I am in my 92nd year, one of the women said to me, Kate, can you still sew? And I thought back on my life. I was an occupational therapist, and if you can name one craft that I have either taught or done. Now, have you anything to say?
Sorry. We might explain to them that the experience at Chalk River that was so bitter and cold was up until about 1949. And at that time, I got a fellowship to the University of Edinburgh in Scotland. And that was the reason that we had 3 or 4 years to live in Scotland, which we enjoyed very much. But we were really Canadians. If I could have gotten a good job in Edinburgh, I might have emigrated. But we were Canadians, and we decided we wanted to come home. So we came back to Chalk River, and I worked there for several years, and was then posted to Europe by Atomic Energy of Canada, my employer, as a liaison scientist between the European Common Market and the Canadian government. So we had a chance then to go to Europe, and we lived in Italy for 2 years. Was it 2 years?
Yes.
And we've been going back to Italy ever since. But Kate has written a book, some of you may know about our love affair with Italy, which is a very good read. And I have written a book which has just come out on our experience in Chalk River in the early days, which I have brought some blurbs from the publisher of that if you're interested. So that is how we happen to go to these various places. And then how did we come to come to Lakefield? That's the next question.
Well, we were in Peterborough.
Yes, I joined Canadian General Electric in Peterborough. Atomic Energy of Canada was not really ready to get into the business of exporting nuclear power systems. And I was convinced from my experience in Europe, which meant I had to know the European programs inside out, that they were being offered inferior systems from both the United States and Britain for nuclear power. So I thought the Canadian system was much better, and I wanted to promote that. And when I came back to Ottawa, I did my best to persuade Atomic Energy of Canada to get into the export business. But they said they weren't ready for it. But Canadian General Electric was just doing that. And so I switched from AECL to Canadian General Electric, and we moved to Peterborough here. And we lived in Peterborough for a couple of years. We were always looking for a place, a more permanent place. And this house that was belonging to the Johnsons came up for sale, and that's how we came to Lakefield.
I had been going all over in Peterborough trying to find a house where there'd be a garden as well. And the reason we finally left was the garden. We had all that lovely land there, and we kept putting more and more in the land, and finally it got too big for us, so we had to sell. But there was something I was going to tell you, but I can't think what it was. That's par for the course now. Oh, I know. He liked his office boy. The office boy where he was said, we've got a house in Lakefield.
Eldon Johnson, yes.
Eldon Johnson, and I went out and looked, and Kim loved, he said he loved it. And I thought, well, if he is happy, that I'll learn to be, because I wasn't just sure, but I must tell you, when we lived in Peterborough, and the scientists from all these countries came, they loved to stand on our balcony and see groundhogs of all things. I thought of all things with the minds they had, and there they were watching groundhogs. And I forgot to tell you, I went to work in your people's house now, and there was beautiful wood there, but it was covered with varnish. And there was a lovely kitchen, it was covered with green paint. I went to work and I became known as the Lakefield stripper. Now, what else do you want?
Whatever you can remember.
I could remember all kinds of things.
Well, I was working for Canadian General Electric. I was an applications engineer promoting Canadian nuclear power systems in Europe. And this is what gave us a chance to visit. My district was included Spain, Italy, Romania, and Yugoslavia. So we had a chance to visit all those places.
I remember one time we were in Germany in a nightclub, and I remembered a little German song that Kim had taught me, and it reduced that man to tears because he hadn't heard it. All this kind of things come back to me since knowing we were coming here, because he came and asked us. There was one thing I wanted to tell you, and I can't. And it was wonderful for us because Kim's aunt, his mother's sister, was stationed in Italy. And when we were in Scotland, we could come down to Italy to see her, and she could come up to visit us in Scotland. But I had something that was fun to tell you that. Except I did when you asked me if I knew how to tap and so forth. And in Deep River, I even gave courses in making gloves. And we had to, because in occupational therapy, there's hardly a course that you don't take to learn craft work. Anything that, for instance, to give a person that needed arm extension, when you put them on a basket, where they had to weave way over the, and I know I had a mother and daughter when I was on home service. That's when you go out to people's homes. And this mother and daughter had heard that celery was very good for you. And when I got on the streetcar after being in their house, everybody was sniffing because having been in there for an hour or two, the celery was uppermost. There's all kinds of things I think I should tell you, but I forget now.
Well, I think that gives you a pretty good idea of how we came to Lakefield. And after a year or so working for Canadian General Electric, the company decided that they were going to get out of the nuclear power business, and AECL decided they were going to take it all over. But by that time, Jack Matthews, who was then headmaster at Lakefield College School, had asked me to come and be director of studies at the school. I told him, I don't know anything about teaching. I said, but I'll try it. Kate and I didn't have any children of our own, and we thought that it was important to have contact with young people. So I was a teacher, a master, like I said in those days, at Lakefield College School for 7 years, before I finally retired from the school and went back to Ottawa with Atomic Energy of Canada. But that gave us a long period in Lakefield when we became acquainted with gentlemen like Len Wingate. We used to have a meat market and all kinds of the thing that we found so attractive about Lakefield was the people were all so interesting, it was fun to know them. So we've always felt Lakefield was our home, and we've been roaming all over the place, but we're quite happy to be settled here, and we're going to be here, I guess, until our day comes up. Oh yes, that's right. I took early retirement from Ottawa at AECL. We started our own company, an energy management business. We had that for about 10 years. We were doing that when you bought the house from us. And we had a couple of big projects. We had one with Randy Kingdon at the Trent Timber Treaty. We built a solar dryer for drying timber. And we also built a dryer in Barbados, in Barbados for agricultural drying. Onions down there would rot in 2 or 3 days if they are left the way they are, but if their water content is reduced to about 20 or 30%. Usually it's more like 80% when they're fresh. When it's reduced to 20 or 30%, they have a shelf life of 2 or 3 weeks. So this was a dryer that we promoted down there. So we had a chance to live in Barbados too.
And one of my experiences, we were in Barbados one day. I was swimming, and we still had the old house. And the bus that brought us back, the coach, set me down, and our driveway hadn't been plowed. I plowed through snow up to my hips to get into the house when I'd been swimming the day before. But tell them about the time when we went back and you got so hot, and that woman said, man.
Oh yeah, and this the big solar dryer is almost as big as this room. It was would take tons of produce, and I went down several months later to put some more instrumentation to it, and I had to get in under the solar collectors to put this instrumentation in, and I've never been so hot in my life. I was absolutely soaking. And the man, the Barbadian that was working with me said, come on, he said, we'll have a drink. And I said, yeah, I'll buy you a drink at the grog shop. There were little pubs they called grog shops there. And so we went in, there was this great big black lady behind the counter, and she took one look at me and she said, man, you wet!
We keep remembering things, and I don't know if there's anything anybody wants to ask us. But it's been lovely, it's been a lovely time to think over things. But we do love Lakefield.
Kim, did you have anything to do with NPD? With the nuclear?
Yes, of course, NPD was built by Canadian General Electric.
Yeah, right,
But I was working for ACL at that time.
right.
So we used to come for meetings every month down to Peterborough from Deep River.
Right.
And we came in a 11-passenger
Oh, yeah,
limousine.
those stretch, yeah, I went there and,
It was, it used to leave Deep River around 7 o'clock in the morning. It would get here at 11, and we would have an hour for meetings, then we'd have lunch, then we'd have another 3 hours for meetings, then we'd go back in the evening, and we used to call this the machine the snake. We hated it, and on winter morning coming down through that Pirawawa
yeah.
and so forth, oh, that was terrible. I know one engineer said one morning, oh my God, he said, there must be an easier way to earn a living. So, CGE built that.
Yeah, what
that
years
thing,
would, what
and
years,
they did a tremendous job.
what years would that have been? About, when was that?
See, 62 it came on power,
Yeah,
62. And 62 is when we went to Italy then.
Well, it's been marvelous being married to him. And it's been 65 years. We've had a wonderful time.
Yeah,
And
let me tell you. We didn't have any children, and we thought it was important to be with young people, and we found the experience at the Grove was just wonderful. It just changed our lives. And when we left Cape, you know, the Italians are always asking you if you have any children. Well, of course, we've always had to say we didn't. But after we taught at the Grove, Kate could say to them, of course we have children. We have hundreds of them, and they're all boys.
And in case you're interested, this locket is as old as he is. It was given to his mother when he was born, and when it's supposed to lock him to the earth.
But given by the Chinese
The
servants.
Chinese servants gave it to him. And this is the same cord that his mother wore, and I wore it. It's pure Chinese silk, and I just wear it normally underneath, but I wear it all the time because I want to keep up to the earth. And that's what it was for.
Thank you, Ann.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions for these people here? Bill, back there?
Bill Twist.
Bill Twist?
I don't have, I worked at NPD, the first nuclear reactor was built. You
Yes,
were
that's
probably
right.
involved with it, Rolfman.
You worked on the installation of pressure tubes, didn't you?
On, yes, in the reactor.
Yeah.
We lived in, the village of, Rolfman, but we call that Dog Patch.
Yes.
Uh,
It's further up the river from us, yeah.
Lofton.
And it was called, that was the village that was left over from building the hydroelectric generator at Diswishen. And NPD was just downstream from Diswishen.
Downstream from that, yeah.
And we lived in the hydro barracks, which weren't very good accommodation either, but the food was great because we had a permanent mill cook there, and so the food was great. But I also wanted to mention, for those that might be interested in Kim's book, Kim is having a book launch at Christ Church on June 26th, Saturday,
Right.
June 26th,
Yes.
2 to 4 in the afternoon. So he'll be launching his book and promoting it for sale,
Yeah.
and of course autographing it. So,
Thanks, Bill. I'll put some of this is some of the literature that the publisher has produced on the book, their flyers that tell you what the book is about. I'll put it over here on the table and also a copy of Kate's book.
And I was going to tell you, do I have to have a game?
Well,
Can you hear me
they got
all right?
Asian.
When we went to Italy, I worked hard with dictionary, and I could not find any word for hot water bottle. And Kim's mother felt the cold. And there I go into a store and say to the woman, I knew what a purse was. So I said, I needed to get a purse I could get hot water out of my dictionary. Anyway, I ended up with a hot water bottle. But people went overboard to help you because there I was with a purse of hot water for the bed. But she got my idea and gave me it.
I think, Mary, you had a question there?
Sure. Kate and Kim, can you tell us a little bit about the history of the house that you owned in Lakefield, what you might have learned about it over the years? It's a wonderful old house, and Mike and Amy
Yes.
are in it now.
Yes. Well, the house, according to the records in Peterborough, was built for the Honorable A. Ross, and it was registered there in 1886. But it must have been bought almost immediately. I don't think Ross ever lived in it, but it must have been bought almost immediately by Levi Payne, because in 1886, Levi Payne gave part of the property to the Hillside Cemetery, just beyond the house. So the Levi Payne had it, I guess, for the rest of his life. And it was completed in 1886. It looks like an ordinary farmhouse from the outside, but the materials in that house, the construction, is just gorgeous. Yeah, I was a little worried about moving the bathtub because I didn't know whether the door joist of the upstairs would hold it until we tore up some of the board and found that the joists were 3 by 12s on 16-inch centers. You could take an elephant up there. We tore out the stairs. There was a maid's room over the kitchen, and we tore the stairs out from that, and they were all oak, clear oak, not a knothole in any of it. And all that black ash paneling around the dining room and in the kitchen is not a knot in any of it.
Where were the stairs, Kim, that you tore out? Behind the kitchen?
They're behind the kitchen where the downstairs bedroom.
Yeah. So we never knew if that was a pantry or,
No, just the poor maid in the early days slept up there.
we didn't know, we just call it Annie's room,
No.
because we don't know anything about it.
Any more questions?
So
Yes.
did Levi, who actually built the house, Kim?
I don't know.
Because we had heard that
I
Levi
don't know.
built the one next door, the Bellamy's used to
Yes.
live in. But the living room wasn't large enough for the whole family to get together. So he moved over to this one, so they could all have Sunday dinner, you know, the 5 girls and
Those 5 girls and 5
We
boys.
heard that, but we didn't know.
They got together once a week.
I tell you though,
They were up until they were in their 80s.
It was amazing.
Every
Those
week.
pictures are
do you
amazing.
know how many doors there are into the dining room in the Bellamy's house? 7 doors into the dining room.
That's amazing.
No, I don't know who built it. I know that a chap named Jack Botterill
Yes.
had a sawmill
Mhm.
up back where the Rashleys, behind where the Rashleys lived. In fact, you can see the concrete base where the sawmill is still there. It's underneath all the rubbish and so forth.
Mhm.
It's still
Jack
there.
Botterill married Levi Payne's daughter,
Right,
Yes,
right?
yes.
yes, that's right.
Yes.
And Botterill was active during World War One, because he finished the town hall in Lakefield. They couldn't finish it during the war, and you notice that it's 1919, where the other buildings are pre-war, 1914. And so maybe Botterill did it, but it must have been English craftsmen that did it, because of course they just completed in '66. They completed the Anglican church, and the work in that is just beautiful. You know, every small thing is just beautifully finished. So there were craftsmen working. They were in Lakefield at the time, and I guess some of them went into the canoe building business too, because they had all the equipment, they had the techniques, and they had the materials. They could build canoes and just about anything, basswood, cedar, anything you wanted. And those canoes were finished just like fine furniture, you know. Walter Walker's still builds them now and again, but you don't see many like that again.
If you notice there, the pictures of the house that we were talking about on the board there, so that would give you an idea what it looked like years ago, not like it
We
looks
bought the
today.
house from Eldon Johnson with pictures in the lower right-hand corner of that left-hand panel.
Did you plant a lot of the trees then? Because most pictures we
No,
see
we
of it,
didn't plant any trees except those, no, even the apple trees were there.
because most of the pictures we see, there's not many trees,
No, I know.
and now they're like this.
When we bought it, there was a big cedar hedge that ran down from the house right down to the highway. We cut that out right down to the fence, so that all that front part was open. Okay, wants to say
yeah.
something?
We were very lucky because Catherine Partail's children, the children of, she had 2 sons, and they went west. And they were at the school when we moved there, and Miss Annie Atwood celebrated her 100th birthday there. But the 3 daughters all came over to our house was one, there's maybe a plant that one of them brought, but it was, so that we are in the older part of the history, knowing them. There was 3, and they called their place out west was known as the Ant Hill, because there were the 3 sisters all there. So it was just luck for us.
Anyone else, this young couple here, so. Anyways, I guess.
Flattery will get you nowhere.
I'd like to thank you both for coming. I enjoyed
Thank you very much.
the visit with you the other night there at your home, and we really appreciate you coming. Thank you very much.
And we truly appreciate being able to live in Lakefield. We love it.